One man sat silently on a flight, refusing to eat or speak, carrying a secret so powerful it would change everything for those around him. This is a story of grief, resilience, and the unexpected reason behind his silence. Stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss how his journey unfolds. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Julie Beckett tugged her carry-on down the narrow aisle of Flight 348, trying to keep an eye on her son while juggling a juice box, a backpack, and a purse that refused to stay on her shoulder. "Max, stay close, honey," she said, her voice already tinged with travel fatigue. 8-year-old Max was bouncing ahead, already fascinated by the plane's tiny windows and rows of mysterious strangers. They were flying from Denver to Boston, a trip Julie had made dozens of times during college, but never with a child in tow. It was Max's first flight, and he was riding the high of adventure. They found their seats near the back of the plane, 22B and 22C, middle and aisle. Julie was grateful for the quick boarding and that Max was too small to care about having the window seat. But as they slid into their row, she realized with a small jolt that someone was already sitting in 22A. He was a thin man, maybe late 30s or early 40s, with sallow skin and eyes hidden behind a gray knit beanie pulled low. He wore a faded black hoodie zipped up to his neck despite the cabin being a comfortable temperature. He didn't look up, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge them at all. Julie offered a polite smile as she settled in beside him. "Hi there," she said. No response. The man stared straight ahead, motionless. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap. Max, oblivious, pressed his nose to the window across Julie's lap. "We're flying, Mom," he whispered excitedly. Julie smiled, but her eyes drifted sideways toward the man. Something about him felt heavy, not threatening, exactly, but not quite right either. As the plane taxied and the usual announcements crackled through the speakers, the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Julie noticed the man didn't glance up once. Even during takeoff, when Max squealed and Julie braced her hand on the seat in front of her, the man in 22A sat still as a statue. He didn't flinch, didn't look out the window. He didn't react at all. She'd been on enough flights to know people handled air travel differently. Some were nervous, some were asleep before wheels up. But this man, he wasn't just quiet. He was absent, like his body was here, but his spirit had stayed behind in Denver. About 30 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant with a bright smile stopped beside their row, offering snacks and drinks. "Hello there. Would you like something to eat or drink?" she asked the man in 22A first. He didn't respond. The attendant waited a beat, then tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. Julie leaned slightly toward him. "Sir?" "She's asking if you want something to eat." Slowly, he shook his head. Not a word, just a small, lifeless gesture. The attendant nodded and moved on to Julie and Max, who eagerly chose cookies and apple juice. Julie tried not to stare, but the more she glanced at the man, the more unsettled she felt. He hadn't brought a book, hadn't pulled out a phone or a tablet. No carry-on under the seat. No personal items except the clothes on his back and a small canvas satchel on the floor in front of him, which he kept his feet pressed against as though guarding it. He didn't sleep. He didn't look around. He just sat there, locked in some invisible cage. Max munched on his cookies and whispered questions. "Why isn't that man talking, Mom?" Julie didn't know how to answer. "Maybe he's just tired, sweetie," she offered, her voice low. But the truth was, something about him made her uneasy. The longer the flight went on, the more palpable his silence became, like it was pressing outward, filling the row, wrapping around her and Max like a fog. She leaned back and closed her eyes, trying to dismiss the feeling. After all, it was just a man, a stranger. People traveled for all kinds of reasons: business, family, funerals. She had no right to assume anything. But something about the man in 22A stuck with her. She couldn't explain why, but she had the unshakable sense that he was on this flight for a reason. And whatever it was, it hadn't even begun to unfold. Julie tried to focus on Max's chatter and the hum of the plane, but her attention kept drifting sideways to the man in 22A. He hadn't moved in almost an hour. No stretch, No sip of water, no shifting in his seat. It was unnatural. His hands remained tightly clasped in his lap, his shoulders stiff, his eyes unfocused. Julie wasn't the only one who noticed. Across the aisle, a teenage girl wearing headphones kept glancing at him from behind the corner of her phone camera. A man in business attire seated directly behind Julie leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowed. People were picking up on the tension, even if no one said it out loud. The flight attendant returned with a tray of drinks and a polite, practiced smile. "Hi again, sir. I just wanted to check if you might have changed your mind. Would you like a drink? Water? Juice?" Her tone was friendly but cautious, the way one might approach a skittish animal. The man didn't blink. He didn't even turn his head. He just shook it again, the same slow, small motion he had given earlier. No eye contact. No words. Julie could tell the attendant was getting concerned. "Sir, are you feeling okay?" she pressed gently. This time, he didn't react at all. Not even a head shake. Just silence. The attendant straightened, her smile fading ever so slightly. "All right. Let us know if you need anything," she said, then glanced at Julie with a quick, questioning look. "And unspoken, is he with you?" Julie responded with the faintest shake of her head. No, she didn't know him. And honestly, she wasn't sure anyone really did. Julie leaned toward Max and whispered, "Why don't you color for a bit?" Max nodded and pulled out a pack of markers and a notebook from his backpack. He sat cross-legged in his seat, scribbling away, his little tongue sticking out in concentration. Julie returned her gaze to the man beside her, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. He didn't smell like alcohol. His clothes, while worn, weren't dirty. There were no visible signs of injury or illness. He was just still, too still, like he was frozen inside. After another 15 minutes, Max, being Max, tried again to break the ice. He looked up from his drawing and held out a cookie. "Do you want one?" he asked, his voice sweet and innocent. The man didn't look, didn't blink. Max waited, confused. "It's really good," he added, holding the cookie a little closer. Julie gently placed her hand over Max's and lowered it. "Let's give him space, okay?" she said softly. Max pouted but nodded, returning to his sketching. The man's foot tapped once against his bag, the only movement he'd made since boarding. Julie looked down and noticed it, his foot pressing protectively against the small canvas satchel. She hadn't seen him open it or touch it since they boarded. It sat like a shadow at his feet, worn at the edges, a faint tear near the zipper. Whatever was in there, he was guarding it. Suddenly, turbulence shook the plane. Not violent, but jarring enough to send plastic cups rattling on tray tables. The fastened seatbelt light dinged above. Max let out a startled yelp and grabbed Julie's hand. Julie's drink splashed slightly over the rim, dampening the napkin. Across the cabin, someone cursed under their breath. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a rough patch. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Julie glanced sideways, instinctively checking on her son, and that's when happened. The man in 22A turned his head. Slowly, for the first time since the flight began, he moved more than a fraction of an inch. His eyes, sunken, glassy, full of something too complex to name, locked directly onto hers. Julie felt her breath catch. There was pain in those eyes. Not rage, not fear. Just sorrow. Profound, gut-deep sorrow. His lips parted, and he whispered a single word. "Worcester." That was it. Just one word. But in the silence that followed, it echoed in Julie's mind like a bell tolling in the distance. Eerie, low, and full of unanswered questions. Julie didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until the word left his lips. Worcester. It was barely audible, more exhaled than spoken, but clear enough. The first and only word he had uttered since they boarded. Her heart fluttered in her chest, not out of fear, but confusion. The way he said it, like someone saying a name at a grave. Max looked up from his drawings, his ears perking. "What's Worcester?" he asked. Julie blinked, caught off guard. "It's a city in Massachusetts," she said, eyes still locked on the man beside her. "West of Boston." The man turned away again, retreating back into himself, gaze locked on the seat in front of him as though their moment had never happened. The turbulence hadn't subsided. The plane gave another small lurch, causing a chorus of rustling and nervous laughter through the cabin. A drink cart up front rattled against a wall. Julie tightened her seatbelt instinctively, her mother's instincts heightened by the motion. Max was calm, still coloring, but Julie could sense the worry beginning to form in his small frame. "We're okay," she reassured him with a gentle squeeze of his hand. But her thoughts weren't on the turbulence. They were on Worcester. Why there? Why that word? It wasn't random. She felt it in her bones. That single word had weight. It meant something. She glanced over at the man again. He hadn't moved. His eyes were forward but unfocused. Still, there was a change in the air around him. A crack in the wall, however small. He had acknowledged the world, even if just briefly. Julie felt something stir in her. Not fear. Not anymore. Curiosity. Compassion. The man behind her, the businessman, leaned forward slightly and whispered, "He okay?" Julie hesitated. "I think so," she replied softly, not really sure if that was true. The businessman nodded once, then leaned back. Julie looked around and realized others were watching now too. Not all, but enough. Human behavior had a way of pulling attention in tight spaces, and the man in 22A had become the silent center of gravity. His refusal to eat. His silence. Now a single, strange word. People were taking notice. Max suddenly tapped Julie's arm and held up his drawing. "Look, Mom, this is you, and this is me. And this," he pointed to a figure with a hoodie and sad eyes, "is the quiet man." Julie glanced over, startled. The figure was simple, childlike, but instantly recognizable. "Why does he look sad, buddy?" she asked. Max shrugged. "Because he misses someone." Julie's breath caught. "Why do you say that?" Max shrugged again, as only a child can. His eyes. They looked like Dad's did when Grandpa died. Julie felt a pang in her chest. Her father had passed away 2 years ago, and Max had only been 6. But even at that age, he had noticed things Julie hadn't expected him to. Kids picked up more than they let on. She looked over again at the man in 22A, who now seemed more fragile than strange. His lips were dry. His jaw was clenched like it hadn't relaxed in days. She watched as his foot gently pressed against the satchel again. That bag, it never left his side. A memory drifted into Julie's mind. Her first flight back to Boston after her father's funeral, sitting beside a stranger, numb with grief, unable to speak. The overwhelming pressure of simply existing in public while broken inside. It wasn't that long ago, and yet somehow she had buried the sensation. She saw it now in this man. Grief, thick and recent. And maybe Worcester was where it began, or ended. As the turbulence faded and the flight smoothed out, Julie felt her heart soften. She looked at the man again, not as a mystery, not as a potential threat, but as a person, someone carrying something too heavy for words. For the first time since boarding, she didn't feel unsettled sitting beside him. She felt responsible, not to fix him, but to witness him, to let him know, even in silence, that he wasn't invisible. She didn't know what had brought him to this plane, or why the name Worcester had surfaced like a ghost in the middle of the storm. But something told her she would find out. And whatever it was, it would change everything. The rest of the cabin had started to settle again. The turbulence passed, and the captain's voice returned with calm reassurances. People resumed reading, chatting, scrolling through phones. But in row 22, the air still felt heavy, like the pressure hadn't let up even though the skies had. Julie sat quietly, watching Max return to his coloring, his legs swinging beneath his seat. She glanced at the man in 22A again, still frozen, still silent, his body drawn inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. She leaned back, trying to gather her thoughts. Worcester. It meant something, obviously, but Julie had no idea what. It was one word, said once, and yet it had opened a floodgate in her mind. Her curiosity warred with caution. This was a stranger. She knew nothing about him, and yet, sitting so close, she couldn't help but feel involved now. Emotionally, at least. A soft voice caught her attention. "Excuse me," said the man behind her, the businessman who'd asked earlier if the man was okay. He leaned forward again, speaking just above a whisper. "Do you know him?" Julie shook her head gently. "No." We sat down, and he was already there. He hasn't said a word, except just now during the turbulence. He said, Worcester. The man furrowed his brow. That's it. Julie nodded. That's it. Another voice chimed in, this one from across the aisle. It was the teenage girl with the earbuds, who had been discreetly filming earlier. He hasn't moved in like 2 hours, she whispered, glancing at the man in 22A, as if afraid he might suddenly lash out. It's kind of creepy. Julie bristled slightly. He's not creepy, she said, firmer than intended. He just seems like he's going through something. The girl blinked. Yeah, well, going through something on a plane freaks people out. You watch the news. Julie didn't respond. She looked forward and took a slow breath. The girl wasn't wrong, but she wasn't right either. Something in Julie refused to write this man off. He wasn't acting out. He wasn't disturbing anyone. He was just grieving, whatever form it took. Just then, a flight attendant approached again, this time a different one, older, with a more authoritative air. She crouched slightly to speak softly to Julie. Hi there, ma'am. Sorry to bother, but a few passengers have expressed some concern about the man in the window seat. Has he spoken to you at all? Julie hesitated. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tension building one quiet whisper at a time. Only once, she said. He said one word, Worcester. That's all. The attendant glanced over at the man in 22A. Her voice dropped. Has he moved? Asked for anything? No. He didn't want a drink or snack. Hasn't touched anything. Just sitting there. That bag hasn't left his feet. The attendant's eyes flicked toward the canvas satchel. She nodded slowly, then straightened. All right, we'll continue to monitor. Just let us know if anything changes. She smiled politely, but there was something else behind it. Unease. As the attendant walked away, Julie could feel it happening. People beginning to form their own narratives. A man sitting silently for hours, refusing food. One cryptic word. A tightly held bag. In today's world, that's all it took for suspicion to sprout like weeds in a garden. It wasn't fair, but it was human nature. She watched it bloom seat by seat, row by row. Max leaned over and whispered, Is the quiet man okay? Julie gave him a reassuring smile, though she wasn't sure she believed it. I think so. He's just sad. Max looked over at the man again, then nodded solemnly, like he understood. He went back to his drawing without another word. Julie stared forward, her pulse picking up again. This wasn't just about her anymore. Eyes were watching now. People were whispering. And if the man didn't speak soon, if he didn't explain himself, things might spiral. In a closed metal tube, 35,000 feet in the air, fear could spread faster than reason. She glanced at the man again. He hadn't moved, but Julie could feel in her gut. Something was coming. And when it did, everything would change. Julie had always believed in instincts, the subtle alerts that nudged at her when something wasn't right. But this time, her instincts weren't sounding alarms. They were whispering something more complicated. Her eyes drifted again to the canvas bag tucked beneath the man's feet. It hadn't moved since takeoff, except for the occasional gentle tap of his foot against it. It wasn't large, more like a courier's satchel than a carry-on. Worn, faded, fraying at the corners. The zipper looked strained, as if the contents inside pushed against its seams. There was nothing overtly threatening about it. No wires, no bulges, no reason to think it held anything other than clothing or maybe books. And yet, the way the man guarded it spoke volumes. Julie had noticed the smallest things, how his leg subtly angled toward it, how his hand sometimes drifted to rest against it, like a reflex. That bag was important, precious, or dangerous. From a few rows ahead, another passenger, a woman with cropped hair and a navy blazer, got up to stretch. She turned slightly and caught sight of the man in 22A. Her gaze lingered for a second too long, and Julie recognized the look, concern laced with suspicion. People were no longer pretending not to notice him. They were watching now. Julie's own anxiety was starting to hum beneath her skin. She glanced toward the front of the plane, wondering if she should say something more to the flight attendants. But what would she say? That he hadn't moved? That he had a bag? That he looked haunted? That wasn't enough. Not really. Still, the tension was growing. An invisible thread stretched tight through row 22. She turned to Max, needing a distraction. "You hungry, buddy?" she asked, reaching under the seat for the small bag of snacks she'd packed. Max looked up. "Can I have a trail mix?" "Sure." She handed it to him, then sat back and tried to steady her breath. That's what happened. The man shifted, a real, unmistakable movement. He bent forward just slightly and placed a hand on the bag. His fingers traced the zipper slowly, like he was deciding whether or not to open it. Julie's heart thudded once hard. She froze, not out of fear, but anticipation. Something was happening. He didn't unzip it. Not yet. Instead, his hand rested on it, and he bowed his head, eyes closing for the first time since she'd sat down. It looked almost like a prayer. Julie leaned slightly closer, voice soft. "Sir," she said gently. He didn't react. She tried again. "Is there someone you're going to see in Worcester?" His eyes opened slowly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, the veil of silence between them began to crack. His lips parted, as though he might speak, but no sound came. Then, quietly, he reached into the side pocket of the bag. Not the main one, but a narrow, exterior pouch, and pulled something out. A photograph. It was old and worn, edges curled. He held it in trembling fingers and extended it just slightly toward Julie. She hesitated, then gently took it. In the photo were 3 people. A younger version of the man beside her, standing in front of a modest house with a woman and a teenage boy. The boy looked about 14. All 3 were smiling, genuine, open smiles. Julie could see the resemblance now. The boy had his eyes. The woman, his gentle jawline. A family. Julie looked up at him. "Your son?" she asked quietly. The man nodded. Slowly, deliberately. Julie felt a weight settle in her chest. She handed the photo back carefully. "Is he in Worcester?" she asked. The man looked down. His hand tightened around the photograph. His lips moved again, and this time she caught 2 more words, just a whisper. "He was." Julie's heart broke a little in that moment. The bag, the silence, the sorrow. It all made sense now. He wasn't carrying something dangerous. He was carrying grief. That bag didn't hold weapons. It held memories, perhaps ashes, or letters, or something that once belonged to a boy who was now gone. Julie sat back, stunned into silence. Around her, the whispers continued. But next to her, something had shifted. The man who had refused to eat or speak was beginning, just barely, to unfold. Julie couldn't take her eyes off the photograph, even after she handed it back. The image of that smiling family, the younger version of the man beside her, the woman with kind eyes, and especially the boy, burned into her mind. There was something so achingly normal about the picture. A backyard, a porch, a mother's hand resting protectively on her son's shoulder. That boy had been loved, deeply. The man's trembling hands tucked the photo back into the outer pocket of the satchel, his motions careful, almost reverent. Then he zipped it closed again and folded his arms, as if he'd just sealed something sacred away. Julie swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She didn't know why this stranger's grief had struck her so deeply, but it had rooted itself in her chest like a cold stone. Maybe it was because she had a son too. Maybe it was because of the way Max had drawn the man, sad and silent. Or maybe it was because Julie recognized something in the man's face that she had seen in her own reflection once, after losing her father. That hollow, disoriented expression that grief painted across a person's soul. Beside her, Max had stopped coloring. He looked between Julie and the man, sensing the shift in energy again. "Mom," he whispered. "Did you ask his name?" Julie blinked. She hadn't. It seemed strange now, after all that had been silently shared between them, that she didn't know his name. She turned back to him. "Sir," she said gently, not wanting to intrude, but needing to ask. "What's your name?" The man's eyes flicked to her. There was hesitation again, so much hesitation, but slowly he spoke. "Daniel," he said. His voice was hoarse, but steady. It felt like a confession. "My name is Daniel." Julie offered him the warmest smile she could. "I'm Julie, and this is my son, Max." Max waved. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," he said softly. "I like your photo." Daniel didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. He looked down at the bag again, then slowly reached into the main compartment. Julie's breath caught. This was the first time he had unzipped it. He opened it only a few inches, just enough to slip his hand inside, and when it came out, he held another photograph. This one was larger, printed on glossy paper, like it had come from a memorial service. He handed it to Julie without a word. She took it gently and turned it over in her hands. It was the boy again, but older now, maybe 17 or 18. Same eyes, but his face was leaner, more mature. He wore a graduation gown, standing tall with a confident smile that spoke of pride and promise. The background was a high school football field. In bold letters at the bottom, it read, "In loving memory of Caleb Thomas Reed, 2004 to 2023. Julie felt her heart clench. Caleb. His son's name was Caleb. Daniel was watching her now, his eyes pleading without asking for anything. Julie looked back at the photo. He's beautiful, she whispered. He looks proud. Daniel nodded once. He was. His voice cracked. He was everything. Julie handed the photo back like it was made of glass. Was it recent? She asked softly. Daniel closed his eyes. 3 weeks ago, he said. Accident. Car. He was driving home from work. He opened his eyes again. His mom, my wife, died 6 years ago. Cancer. It was just him and me. Julie felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Daniel looked out the window, his voice low. I wasn't supposed to be on this flight. I'd canceled twice. Couldn't do it. Couldn't face it. But today, he paused. Today would have been his birthday. 18. The air left Julie's lungs. The weight of that truth settled between them like a physical thing. No wonder he had sat in silence. No wonder he hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken. He was holding more than grief. He was holding the last pieces of a life he'd built around his son. Max reached over and, with the innocence only a child could muster, placed his small hand on Daniel's wrist. I think Caleb would be happy you're going to see him, he said. Daniel looked down at Max's hand. And then, finally, for the first time, he smiled. It was faint, wounded, but real. And in that moment, something inside the silence broke. Julie sat back in her seat, the words still echoing in her head. Today would have been his birthday. She stared out the window for a moment, blinking away tears, watching the clouds drift by like slow-moving ghosts. There was something sacred about what Daniel had just shared. It had taken everything in him to open up, and now she felt a quiet responsibility to hold his story with care. He hadn't told her out of weakness. He told her because the weight was too much for one person to carry alone. Daniel sat still again, but this time it wasn't the tense, closed-off stillness from earlier. His shoulders had loosened slightly, and though his eyes were still distant, there was a softness to him now, like something had finally given way inside. Julie could feel it too. The wall had cracked. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was reverent. Max leaned his head against Julie's arm and whispered, Do you think Caleb liked drawing? Julie glanced down at her son, then at Daniel, unsure if she should ask. But before she could decide, Daniel looked at Max and gave a small nod. He loved to draw, he said. He used to sketch comic book characters, made up his own heroes. He even had names for them. His voice was steadier now, but carried a weight. He wanted to be an animator, Pixar or DreamWorks. That was the dream. Max smiled gently. Maybe he's drawing in heaven now. Daniel didn't reply right away. He stared at the seat in front of him, eyes glistening. Then he said, almost to himself, maybe he is. Julie wanted to ask more. She had so many questions. What had Caleb been like? What kind of music did he listen to? Was Daniel going to Worcester for a memorial? But she knew better than to press. Grief didn't follow a schedule. It didn't yield to curiosity. It opened only when it was ready. Still, she found herself speaking. My father passed 5 years ago, she said softly. Lung cancer. I didn't think I could get on a plane for his funeral, either. But something told me I had to. She paused, then added, I think it matters, showing up, even when we feel like we can't. Daniel gave a slow nod. I almost didn't make it today. I sat in the car for 30 minutes at the airport. Just frozen. He looked at her. But something about this seat, I don't know. Maybe I was meant to talk to someone. Or maybe just sit next to someone kind. Julie looked away, feeling overwhelmed by the unexpected intimacy of the moment. She hadn't planned to be anyone's comfort today. But maybe the universe didn't care about plans. Across the aisle, the teenage girl who had been watching earlier gave them another glance. This time, her expression was different. Not fearful, but curious, almost respectful. She'd seen the change too. The businessman behind them leaned forward again, speaking quietly. "Everything all right now?" Julie turned to him and nodded. "Yes. He's not a threat. He's just mourning." The man nodded and sat back. The tension in the row had thinned. The energy had shifted. Fear had been replaced with empathy, even if only in small pockets. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later, crouching by Julie's seat again. "Ma'am, I want to check in," she said. "The captain's been made aware of the earlier concern. Is everything under control?" Julie looked at Daniel, who gave her a small, grateful glance. Then she turned back to the attendant. "Yes, everything's okay. He just lost someone. He's traveling for family." The attendant softened. "I see. Thank you." She stood up and looked at Daniel, giving him a respectful nod before walking away. Julie exhaled and looked down at her lap. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Daniel looked at her. "Thank you," he said, "for not treating me like a problem." "You're not," Julie said. "You're a father. That's all I needed to know." And in the quiet that followed, no one said a word. But somehow, everything was understood. The plane hit a mild pocket of turbulence, causing the overhead bins to rattle gently. Julie instinctively placed her hand over Max's, grounding him even though he seemed unbothered. Daniel didn't flinch either. In fact, he didn't seem to notice. His gaze had drifted upward toward the small square door of the overhead compartment above his seat, his thoughts clearly far from the gentle rumble of the plane. Julie watched him quietly. Something about the way he stared upward told her he wasn't just looking at a bin. He was remembering something. The way a person looks into the middle of nowhere when they're being pulled back into a memory they haven't visited in years. Daniel finally broke the silence. "He used to love planes," he said. "Caleb, I think he wanted to be a pilot before he got into drawing. We went to an air show when he was 10, and he couldn't stop talking about the jets for weeks. He'd press his face to the glass at the airport every time we flew anywhere, just fascinated." Julie smiled softly. "Max is like that too," she said. "He knows every type of aircraft, even the models. He corrects me when I say jet instead of plane." Max perked up at the mention of his name. "Do you know what kind of plane this is, Mr. Daniel?" Daniel glanced around, then gave a faint smile. "I think this is a Boeing 737. Max beamed. "It is. The Max series. See the split wingtips out the window." Daniel nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "Your son's sharp," he said to Julie. Julie ruffled Max's hair. "He gets it from his grandpa. My dad used to fly in the Air Force. Max was obsessed with his stories." Daniel chuckled quietly, but it was a sound wrapped in sorrow. Caleb used to draw his own airline logos, designed a whole fake company called Starsky, made boarding passes, flight maps, even in-flight magazines. Julie laughed, picturing it vividly. "That's amazing. Sounds like he was both creative and organized. That's a rare combo in kids." Daniel nodded, his smile fading just a little. "He was special, not just because he was mine. He looked at the world like it was something he could shape, like nothing was permanent and everything could be redesigned to be better. I envied that sometimes." Julie didn't know what to say to that. She didn't want to offer platitudes or pretend to understand. But she could listen. She could witness it. Daniel leaned back in his seat, glancing again at the overhead bin. "I almost didn't bring it," he said. "What's in the bag?" Julie looked over, surprised. "Is it okay if I ask what's inside?" He hesitated, then nodded. "His sketchbooks. And a hoodie he used to wear. One of those ratty ones you keep trying to throw away, but he'd never let go of it. It still smells like his cologne." He paused, swallowing hard. "I wasn't ready to spread his ashes yet, but I needed to bring something that felt like him. Something that would make me feel like I wasn't flying to his grave empty-handed." Julie felt her chest tighten. The weight of that bag wasn't just physical. It carried pieces of Caleb's life. Proof that he had existed, that he had dreamed. "You're not empty-handed," she said quietly. "Not even close." Daniel turned to her, his eyes wet again. "That means more than you know." The plane shuddered gently again, and the pilot's voice came over the speakers, giving an update on their descent. They were about an hour from landing in Worcester. The journey was nearing its end, but something deeper had already shifted. Julie reached down and unzipped her own carry-on just a little, pulling out a small photo of her father that she kept in her wallet. She held it in her palm, letting Daniel see it without a word. He gave a solemn nod. Above them, the overhead bin creaked softly as if echoing the weight of memories resting inside. Not just Daniel's, but every passenger's unspoken story packed and sealed in quiet grief. And for a moment, in the soft hum of the cabin and the hush of descending altitude, there was peace. Not because the pain had lifted, but because it had finally been shared. The plane began its gradual descent, the hum of the engines shifting into a softer, steadier tone. Outside, the sky had deepened to a rich navy, punctuated by the twinkling lights of distant towns and highways far below. Inside the cabin, a gentle calm had settled over the passengers, broken only by the occasional rustle of seat belts being fastened and murmured preparations for landing. Daniel sat quietly, his hands resting on his lap, fingers gently intertwined as if holding on to something intangible. Julie watched him from the side, feeling a new kind of respect for the man who had carried so much sorrow in silence, but now seemed almost fragile in the soft glow of the overhead light. The seatbelt sign flicked on, and the flight attendants moved swiftly down the aisle, securing carts and reminding everyone to stow away their belongings. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, leaving a warm amber glow that flickered against the passengers' faces, lending a quiet intimacy to the final moments of the flight. Daniel's eyes were fixed ahead, but Julie noticed a subtle change in them, a flicker of anticipation, perhaps, or the steady gathering of courage. Max, still nestled in Julie's lap, looked up at Daniel with wide, earnest eyes. "Are you ready, Mr. Daniel?" he asked softly. Daniel gave a small nod, the faintest smile touching his lips. "As ready as I'll ever be." Julie smiled, feeling the bittersweet weight of that answer. Ready to face the pain, the memories, the final goodbye. It was a kind of bravery she admired deeply. The plane banked gently as it approached Worcester Regional Airport. Through the window, the sprawling city lights came into clearer view, shimmering like a constellation scattered across the earth. The runway stretched out ahead, a strip of illuminated pavement cutting through the darkness. Julie's thoughts drifted to Daniel's son, Caleb. How this landing marked not just the end of a flight, but the beginning of a long-awaited farewell. As the wheels touched down with a smooth but definitive thud, the cabin filled with soft applause, some passengers relieved, others quietly appreciative. Daniel's gaze lingered on the window, watching the runway lights blur past in a streak of gold and white. He swallowed hard, then turned to Julie and Max. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here with me." Julie nodded. "You don't have to thank me. Sometimes, it's the presence of strangers that helps us carry the heaviest burdens." Daniel looked down at the satchel resting at his feet, the bag that carried the last tangible pieces of his son's life. "It's strange," he mused, "how something so small can hold so much meaning. Like this bag, it's more than fabric and zippers. It's my connection to Caleb, to everything we shared." Max reached out and touched the bag gently. "Maybe it's magic," he said with childlike certainty. "Magic that keeps Caleb with you." Daniel's smile deepened. "Maybe it is." The plane taxied to the gate, the engines slowing to a low rumble. Flight attendants prepared to open the doors, signaling the end of the journey. Daniel stood slowly, gathering his belongings with deliberate care. Julie helped him lift the satchel into his hands, as if passing on the weight with a quiet blessing. Outside, the cool evening air awaited, carrying the scent of distant pine and fresh rain. Daniel took a deep breath, as if trying to absorb strength from the night itself. "I'll be okay," he said. "Today I start to heal." Julie nodded, feeling a hopeful warmth spread inside her chest. "Healing isn't a straight path," she said softly, "but every step forward matters." As Daniel made his way down the jet bridge, Julie and Max watched him disappear into the airport terminal, a solitary figure moving toward a future shaped by loss, but also by love and memory. Max tugged at Julie's sleeve. "Mom, do you think he'll be all right?" Julie smiled down at her son, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Max, I think he will." And as the landing lights faded behind them, the plane stood still, a vessel that had carried grief, hope, and connection across the sky. The airport terminal was a swirl of light and sound. Rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, distant announcements. But to Daniel, it all felt muted, as if he were moving through a fog. The satchel with Caleb's belongings hung heavy at his side, an unspoken tether to the son he had lost but still carried with him. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the small gathering that had come to meet him. His sister, his mother, a few close friends. Each face promised comfort, but also a mirror reflecting the depth of his grief. As he walked toward them, Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that the flight was over, that he had made it through the journey he had dreaded for months. Apprehension because the real work, the farewell, had only just begun. His sister, Emily, was the first to spot him, rushing forward with open arms. "Danny," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They embraced tightly, the kind of hug that held years of shared pain and unspoken support. His mother, seated in a wheelchair, smiled softly through her tears. "We're here," she said simply. "Together." Daniel nodded, the lump in his throat making speech impossible. He looked down at the satchel again and then back up at the faces around him. "Thank you all," he managed, his voice rough but sincere, "for coming." They led him to a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the bustle, where they could speak without interruption. Daniel carefully opened the satchel, pulling out Caleb's worn sketchbooks first. Each page was a glimpse into the vibrant mind of his son, drawings filled with bold lines and imaginative worlds, a testament to the boy's dreams and creativity. Emily knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the drawings. "He was incredible," she said softly. "You gave him a gift, Danny, the courage to be himself." Daniel smiled, a sad but genuine expression. "He taught me more than I ever taught him." Then he reached into the bag again and pulled out the faded hoodie, holding it up as if it were a sacred relic. The smell of Caleb's cologne still lingered faintly, stirring memories that were both comforting and painful. They spoke little as they packed the items carefully, preparing for the small ceremony that would come later. The airport felt distant now, the moment shrinking into a sacred space shared only by those who loved Caleb. Emily placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said. "No rush, no pressure." Daniel nodded, grateful for her steady presence. "I don't know how to do this without him," he admitted quietly. "You don't have to do it alone," Emily reminded him. "We're all here." Max tugged at Julie's sleeve, his young eyes wide with empathy. "Is it hard to say goodbye?" he asked softly. Julie knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but saying goodbye can also be the start of remembering the good times." Daniel looked at Max and smiled faintly. "Your mom's right. It's not the end. It's part of the story." As the group prepared to leave the terminal, Daniel took one last look around, a glance filled with gratitude for the flight that had carried him here and the people who stood by him now. Outside, the night air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Daniel inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the journey beginning to lift, replaced by the fragile hope of healing. Julie watched him go, knowing that this quiet goodbye was only the first step on a long path. But for the first time since boarding that plane, Daniel's shoulders seemed a little less burdened. And in that small moment, amid the shadows and soft lights of the terminal, a new chapter quietly began. The morning air was crisp and cool, a gentle breeze whispering through the tall pines that surrounded the small clearing. Daniel stood quietly by the edge of the hill, the satchel containing Caleb's belongings resting at his feet. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange as the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the scene. His family had gathered, a handful of close friends and loved ones, all sharing in this sacred moment. The ceremony was simple, No grand speeches or rituals, just a quiet farewell to a boy who had left too soon but would never be forgotten. Daniel felt the weight of the past few weeks settle deep in his chest, the grief that had accompanied him on the flight, in the airport, and now here, surrounded by those who loved Caleb. He reached into the satchel and pulled out the small urn that held his son's ashes, the cold metal surprisingly heavy in his hands. He cradled it gently, as if afraid to break the fragile connection between the physical and the spiritual. Emily stood beside him, her hand steady on his arm. "Take your time," she whispered. "We're here with you." He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun's light was growing stronger. With a steady breath, Daniel opened the urn, the tiny grains shimmering softly in the morning light. He lifted it slowly, scattering the ashes into the breeze. The wind caught the delicate particles, carrying them upward and outward, blending them with the earth and sky. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The grief that had felt so heavy began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Daniel closed his eyes, imagining Caleb soaring freely among the clouds, his dreams finally taking flight. Max stepped forward, his small hand clutching a folded piece of paper. "Dad," he said softly, "I wrote something for Caleb." Daniel opened his eyes and smiled, grateful for the boy's innocence and courage. Max unfolded the paper and began to read a heartfelt poem about love, loss, and hope, his voice steady despite the tears glistening in his eyes. The words hung in the air, a beautiful tribute that touched everyone present. After Max finished, Daniel took the paper and pressed it close to his heart. "Thank you, Max," he said. "That means everything." They spent the next hour sharing stories and memories, laughter mingling with tears as the sun climbed higher. Daniel felt surrounded by warmth and support, a reminder that he was not alone in his sorrow. As the ceremony came to a close, Daniel carefully packed Caleb's belongings back into the satchel. He looked around at the faces of those who had come to say goodbye, feeling a deep gratitude. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but today marked a beginning, a moment when grief and love intertwined to create something enduring. Julie stepped beside him, offering a quiet smile. "You did well today," she said. "Caleb will be proud." Daniel returned her smile, a flicker of hope shining through the pain. "I'm trying," he replied, "one day at a time." As they walked back toward the car, Daniel glanced up at the brightening sky. The ashes were scattered, but Caleb's spirit was everywhere, in the trees, the wind, and the hearts of those who loved him. And in that moment, Daniel knew that healing was not about forgetting, but about carrying the love forward, no matter where the road led next. The days following the ashes ceremony unfolded like a slow sunrise, gradual, tentative, yet filled with promise. Daniel returned to his apartment in Worcester, the familiar walls greeting him with a quiet comfort he hadn't realized he needed. The satchel with Caleb's belongings rested on a shelf, a constant reminder of the boy's presence, though no longer a weight crushing his heart. The grief was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but mingled now with a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, life could move forward. Julie and Max visited often, their company a balm to Daniel's wounded spirit. Max, with his boundless curiosity and kindness, asked endless questions about Caleb's art and dreams, keeping the memory alive in ways Daniel found both heartwarming and bittersweet. Julie, steady and compassionate, offered support without pushing, understanding that healing wasn't a race but a journey. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window, Daniel sat at his desk surrounded by Caleb's sketchbooks. He flipped through the pages slowly, tracing the bold lines and vibrant colors, feeling his son's creative energy pulse through the paper. The idea struck him suddenly, a way to honor Caleb's spirit and turn grief into something meaningful. He would start an art scholarship in Caleb's name, to support young artists with big dreams but limited means. It felt like the perfect tribute, a way to keep Caleb's legacy alive, inspiring others to chase their passions and never give up. The thought brought a small, genuine smile to Daniel's lips, the first in weeks that hadn't been forced or fleeting. That evening, Daniel met with Emily and a few close friends to share the idea. Their enthusiasm was immediate and heartfelt, and plans began to form: a foundation, fundraising events, partnerships with local schools. The project became a light in the darkness, a collective hope that honored loss by creating opportunity. Julie watched Daniel's transformation with quiet admiration. The man who had boarded that plane months ago, broken and silent, was now a father ready to embrace new purpose. It wasn't a return to normal, but something different, an acceptance that life after loss required courage and resilience. One day, Max tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Do you think Caleb would like this?" he asked. Daniel looked down, warmth filling his chest. "I know he would," he said firmly. He wanted to change the world with his art. Months passed, and the Scholarship Foundation took shape. Daniel found solace in the work, each step forward a testament to Caleb's lasting influence. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, it fueled a determination to make something beautiful out of tragedy. On a crisp spring morning, Daniel stood before a small crowd gathered for the scholarship's inaugural award ceremony. He spoke with honesty and hope, honoring Caleb's memory while encouraging others to pursue their dreams. The applause that followed wasn't just for the speech, it was for the journey, the healing, the new beginning. As Daniel stepped down from the podium, Julie approached, her eyes shining. "You did it," she said softly. Daniel smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "We did it," he corrected. "It took a village." The path ahead was still uncertain, but Daniel was ready. The past would always be part of him, but the future, filled with possibility and love, beckoned. And in that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and strangers touched by Caleb's story, Daniel finally felt the first real stirrings of peace. Life settled into a new rhythm for Daniel, marked by the quiet routines of healing and the hopeful pulse of the Scholarship Foundation. Yet, amid the steady forward motion, there came moments that surprised him. Connections he never anticipated, threads of human kindness weaving through his grief in unexpected ways. It began with a letter, simple and unassuming, slipped under his apartment door one evening as the city's hum settled into a soft lull. The note was from a young woman named Mia, a scholarship recipient from the first round of applicants. She wrote of how Caleb's story and art had inspired her own dreams, how the scholarship had given her a chance to attend art school she never thought possible. Her words were filled with gratitude, but more than that, with a quiet strength that resonated deeply with Daniel. Touched, he replied, and soon their correspondence blossomed into something more, a friendship built on shared passions and understanding. Mia's letters spoke of struggles and hopes, of late-night painting sessions and moments of doubt. Daniel found himself looking forward to her updates, her voice a balm to his still healing heart. One chilly afternoon, Mia invited Daniel and Julie to a gallery opening featuring her work. The event was small but vibrant, the walls alive with colors and emotions that echoed Caleb's spirit. As Daniel walked through the exhibition, he felt a profound connection not only to the art, but to the community that had embraced Mia's journey. It was a reminder that life, even after loss, could create new chapters filled with beauty and meaning. Julie noticed the change in Daniel, the way his eyes lit up when discussing art, the spark of enthusiasm rekindled by these unexpected bonds. Max, too, grew fond of Mia, admiring her dedication and creativity. Their visits became a source of joy, a light-hearted counterbalance to the weight of memory. But the most surprising connection came one evening when Daniel met Mia's brother, Ethan. They discovered shared experiences. Both had lost loved ones and navigated the difficult terrain of grief. Their conversations were honest and raw, offering comfort in mutual understanding. Slowly, a friendship formed, one that extended beyond tragedy into hope and renewal. Through these relationships, Daniel learned that healing was rarely a solitary journey. It was found in the moments of reaching out and being reached for, in the fragile yet powerful ties that bind people together. The past remained a part of him, But these new connections helped stitch the torn edges of his heart with threads of resilience. One night, as Daniel sat with Julie and Max, reflecting on the year that had passed, he realized how far he had come. The silence that once enveloped him had been replaced by voices of friends, family, and strangers who had become a chosen family. He looked at Julie, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I never imagined how many people would help me carry this," he said softly. She squeezed his hand. "That's the thing about loss. It breaks you open, but it also makes room for others to step in." Max, wide-eyed and thoughtful, added, "And sometimes those others bring magic." Daniel smiled, feeling the truth of his son's words ripple through the room. The magic of unexpected connections, the healing power of shared stories, and the promise of new beginnings. As the night deepened, Daniel felt a quiet hope settle within him. Not the naive hope of forgetting, but the mature hope of carrying love forward. With every letter, every conversation, and every moment of laughter and tears, he was weaving a tapestry of life that honored Caleb's memory while embracing the future. And in that weaving, Daniel found peace. The early spring air was tinged with warmth, a subtle promise of growth and renewal. Daniel stood in the modest studio space he had recently rented downtown, sunlight streaming through tall windows and casting golden patterns across the wooden floor. This was new territory for him, a place where ideas could take shape, a blank canvas for dreams yet to be realized. It was here, amid the quiet hum of the city waking up, that Daniel found himself confronting the future with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. For months, he had poured his energy into the Scholarship Foundation, honoring Caleb's legacy through the success of others. But now a new vision was emerging, one that intertwined his own talents with the memory of his son. Daniel had always loved to write, though his career had been in business. Inspired by the stories he'd heard from scholarship recipients, the letters from Mia, and the conversations with Ethan, he began to see a way to give voice to the grief and hope that had defined his journey. Sitting at an old oak desk, Daniel pulled out a fresh notebook, its pages crisp and inviting. He hesitated briefly, the familiar fear of vulnerability creeping in, but then dipped his pen into the ink of purpose. Words spilled onto the page, raw, honest, and full of feeling. He wrote about loss, love, and the fragile strength of moving forward. Each sentence was a tribute, a confession, a bridge between past pain and future possibility. Julie stopped by one afternoon, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. She found Daniel immersed in his writing, brows furrowed in concentration. "How's the new project coming?" she asked gently. Daniel looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's scary," he admitted, "but it feels right, like I'm finally saying what I've needed to say all along." Julie nodded, understanding the courage it took to expose one's soul in words. "You're giving others a gift, the chance to see they're not alone." The support from friends and family bolstered Daniel's confidence. The community that had formed around Caleb's memory now rallied behind Daniel's new dream. Ethan offered to help with editing, Mia shared the writing with her art network, and Emily promised to organize readings and events. Together, they created a small but passionate team dedicated to turning Daniel's writing into something meaningful. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's notebook filled with stories, his own and those of others who had faced grief and found ways to carry on. His writing became a beacon, connecting people through shared experience and healing. The studio buzzed with energy, the once empty room now alive with hope and creativity. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel stepped outside to the balcony overlooking the city lights. He took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life around him. The pain of loss still lingered, but it was no longer a shadow that consumed him. Instead, it was a quiet companion, a part of his story but not the whole. Max joined him, eyes wide with admiration. "Dad, do you think Caleb would like what you're doing?" he asked. Daniel smiled, ruffling Max's hair. "I think he'd be proud. This is for him, and for all of us." As the stars emerged, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace settle within. The new dream was more than a project. It was a promise to live fully, to honor the past by embracing the future. And in that promise, he found strength. The journey was far from over, but Daniel knew one thing clearly. He was ready to face whatever came next. With love as his guide and Caleb's spirit woven into every word, Daniel stepped forward into a future that, though uncertain, held infinite possibility. The day of the celebration arrived like a burst of sunlight after a long storm. The community center in Worcester was transformed into a lively space adorned with colorful banners, framed artworks, and photographs capturing moments from Caleb's life. Friends, family, scholarship recipients, and supporters gathered together, their faces alight with a mixture of joy and reverence. The air buzzed with anticipation, the hum of conversations weaving stories of grief, resilience, and hope. Daniel stood near the entrance, watching as people arrived, greeting them with a warm smile despite the flutter of nerves inside. This event was more than just a party. It was a tribute to Caleb's memory and a testament to how one life could ripple outward, touching countless others. As he looked around, he felt the presence of his son in every corner. In the paintings, in the laughter, and in the tears shared between strangers united by love. Max ran up to him, excitement shining in his eyes. "Dad, look, that's Mia's painting. It's amazing." He pointed toward a large canvas depicting a soaring eagle, vibrant and full of motion. Daniel nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "She's incredibly talented," he agreed, just like Caleb believed. The ceremony began with a speech from Emily, who spoke eloquently about the power of art and community to heal wounds that words alone couldn't touch. She praised Daniel's courage and the collective effort that had brought the Scholarship Foundation and this celebration to life. Her words stirred the crowd, opening the space for heartfelt applause and quiet reflection. Then, one by one, scholarship recipients stepped forward to share their stories. Young artists spoke about the struggles they faced and how the support they received had transformed their lives. Their voices, at times trembling with emotion, carried a strength that filled the room. Daniel listened closely, each story resonating deeply, reminding him that Caleb's legacy was alive and growing. When it was Daniel's turn, he stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding. He spoke of loss and love, of pain and perseverance. He told the story of Caleb, the boy who had inspired a community and whose dreams had become a beacon for others. His voice wavered, but he pressed on, finding strength in the crowd's unwavering attention. "I stand here today, not just as a father mourning a son, but as someone who has learned that even in the darkest moments, there is light," Daniel said. "Caleb's spirit lives on through each of you, through every brushstroke and every dream. Thank you for carrying him with you." The applause was overwhelming, a chorus of support and shared hope. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he stepped away from the microphone, feeling the full weight of the journey he had traveled. In that moment, surrounded by love and remembrance, he understood that healing was not about forgetting, but about embracing the connections that made life meaningful. After the speeches, the celebration blossomed into an evening of music, laughter, and camaraderie. Guests mingled, exchanging stories and dreams, forging bonds that would endure beyond the event. Daniel watched as Max joined a group of young artists, his face alight with curiosity and excitement. A living reminder that life, with all its challenges, also held boundless promise. As the night wound down, Daniel found a quiet moment outside, the cool air wrapping around him like a gentle embrace. He looked up at the stars, feeling Caleb's presence in the vastness above. The journey had been long and painful, but here, in this moment, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. Julie joined him, her hand finding his. "You've come so far," she said softly. Daniel smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Thanks to everyone who helped me get here," he replied. "And thanks to Caleb for giving me a reason to keep going." Together, they stood in silence, hearts full, ready to face whatever the future held. The celebration was not an end, but a beautiful beginning, a new chapter written with love, courage, and the enduring power of hope. The morning after the celebration dawned clear and bright, as if the world itself was inviting Daniel to embrace the new chapter he had begun writing. The city hummed softly beyond his window, a familiar soundtrack that now felt less like background noise and more like a steady heartbeat. Steady, dependable, and full of promise. He stood there for a moment, letting the sunlight wash over him, the warmth a gentle reminder that life, despite its heartbreaks, always moves forward. Daniel's thoughts drifted to Caleb, to the boy who had once filled their home with laughter, sketches, and boundless dreams. The ache of loss was still present, a quiet shadow that would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become a foundation, a solid base upon which he could rebuild his life with purpose and hope. The scholarship foundation, the writing project, the friendships that had blossomed, all these were testaments to the power of resilience and love. He prepared for the day with a calm focus, knowing that today would be one of many steps toward healing. Julie and Max were already up, their voices carrying warmth through the apartment. Max, ever the beacon of youthful optimism, was eager to share news about his own budding art project, inspired by Caleb's legacy. Julie's presence remained his anchor, steady, encouraging, unwavering. Later, Daniel sat at his desk, reviewing notes for a speech he had been invited to deliver at a local community center. This speech was different. It was not just about Caleb or grief, but about transformation and the importance of community in overcoming adversity. He hoped his words would resonate, just as the stories shared at the celebration had touched so many hearts. As he practiced his speech aloud, the words flowed with newfound confidence. He spoke of loss, yes, but also of hope, courage, and the incredible strength found in human connection. He spoke of how every person, no matter their pain, could find a way to move forward, to build something beautiful from the ashes of sorrow. When the time came to deliver the speech, Daniel stood before a crowd that gathered eagerly. Faces familiar and new looked back at him, reflecting the diverse fabric of a community united by stories of endurance and renewal. He shared his journey with honesty and grace, weaving Caleb's story into a larger tapestry of healing. The audience listened intently, many nodding in recognition, some wiping tears, all moved by the authenticity of his message. Afterwards, as people approached to thank him or share their own stories, Daniel felt the unmistakable power of shared experience. Each conversation was a thread, strengthening the bonds between them, weaving a safety net of empathy and understanding. The event became more than a speech. It was a gathering of hearts, each one ready to keep moving forward together. Returning home, Daniel was greeted by Max's excited chatter about upcoming art classes and new friendships. Julie had prepared dinner, and the simple comfort of family filled the space with warmth. For the first time in a long while, Daniel allowed himself to feel truly present, grounded in the love around him and open to the possibilities ahead. That night, as he lay in bed, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. The journey had been marked by unimaginable pain and profound growth. It had tested his limits and reshaped his understanding of strength and vulnerability. Through it all, he had discovered a deeper connection to life and to those who walked beside him. He closed his eyes, envisioning Caleb's smile, the bright spark of creativity that had once lit up their lives. Daniel promised himself to carry that light forward, not just in memory, but in action, to live fully, to love fiercely, and to embrace each new day with courage. Because moving forward was not forgetting. It was honoring the past by building a future filled with hope, purpose, and love. And with that promise, Daniel finally felt peace settle in his soul, a peace hard-won, deeply felt, and beautifully earned. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Daniel's story, a tale of loss, resilience, and the power of hope that shines even in the darkest times. Life often tests us in ways we never expect, but it's our courage to keep moving forward and the connections we build that truly define us. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment below to share your thoughts. Your support means the world and inspires more stories like this. Until next time, take care and remember, every ending is just the start of a new beginning.